is the traveler said, all right, I'll leave you this magic soup stone, but remember that it's magic and it only works if you come together to make the soup. If just one of you tries to make the soup all by yourself, not only will it not work, but the magic will be lost forever. And then the traveler continued on their way, and they hosted another stone soup and another stone soup. And everywhere they went, they reseeded community. They brought people back together, and they made sure that people were fed, not just with food, but in spirit, as I said. And so that story, that story of sharing really gets down to the work that we do as an organization, where we work from community to community and try and kind of invigorate people's communal leanings, attributes. But it also speaks to the need for the power of storytelling and the need for just a little bit of trickery every once in a while to remind people of their best interests.
Mm.
And when you use your magic, really for good to support people like that, just a little bit of that magic can go a long way. I had been doing a bunch of work for a couple of years around advocating for GMO labeling in the United States for genetically modified food, and had been involved in a kind of co-led a march from New York City to Washington, D.C. in 2011. We had 313 miles over 16 days and events the whole way. And I'd been working in the next year in 2012 in California on Prop 37 to support GMO labeling on the state level, and had co-coordinated the biggest march for GMO labeling in California, which is in San Francisco, and we did banner drops and actions all over the state. And unfortunately, we narrowly lost that, being massively outspent by Monsanto and other biotech companies. But it planted a seed for a lot of people. And that following year, I had an opportunity to organize a large scale event in Washington, D.C. at the Food and Drug Administration, calling on GMO labeling and kind of food democracy. But the event didn't start out that way. I was actually asked to coordinate the Michael Taylor takeover. And so I said, yeah, I'll do it. And the goal was to bring, people, to organize buses and vans and bring people from all over the East Coast for this large scale event. And after a couple of days or a couple of weeks actually of trying to organize these buses and vans, a lot of the organizers and people that I knew from, years of doing activist work were like, we really want to get a bus together, but nobody we talk to knows who Michael Taylor is. And listeners, viewers, those of you who don't, if you don't know who Michael Taylor is, don't feel bad about it. Most people don't, but he plays a very, very major role, or has historically played a major role in the food that's available across the United States. So Michael Taylor was a lawyer for Monsanto for years, and then he worked with the first Bush administration to create the substantially equivalent language that allowed genetically modified foods to be grown and sold in the United States without any labeling or without any advanced testing. He then, continued his work with Monsanto, and then was brought back and got bovine growth hormone approved by the USDA, which was a Monsanto product. He then was the chief lobbyist, head lawyer and chief lobbyist for Monsanto. And then Obama, in his first term, made Michael Taylor, created a new position within the administration and made Michael Taylor the National Food Safety Czar. Talk about the fox being let into the henhouse. And so there was this opportunity when Obama got reelected and he was starting his second term. There was a number of different cabinet members that were transitioning out at that point in time. It was a natural point to put some pressure. So the idea was to try to put pressure on the Obama administration to fire Michael Taylor, so he would no longer be in that very, very powerful position. But the language, the event was being hosted by Occupy Monsanto. The language around it was the Michael Taylor takeover. It was incredibly aggressive, and it was related to somebody that had been hiding in the shadows that nobody knew who that really was. And it wasn't going to be an effective campaign. And so I had to sit down with a number of the other organizers, and I was like, hey, what if we shift the story? What if we shift the focus? And what if instead of this Michael Taylor takeover, we do an eat in at the FDA? And everyone was like, oh, it's like part be in, part sit in, tie with the food. Like, all right, so there's like this historical context to it. And I was like, and let's take it one step further. Let's do a stone soup. And they're like, oh, what's that? Told them the story of stone soup. And so that's what we landed on. And we did this eat in at the FDA and had people bus in from 14 different states around the East Coast. Hundreds of people showed up. And we got there that day, and there was 27 like fully clad riot officers, with machine guns and sun guns and tear gas and everything, full masks, like whole thing waiting for us out in front of the FDA. And we'd let them know we were coming. We'd sent them invitations. Like, we were very clear that what was going to be happening. And so we drove around the corner and we unloaded all of our stuff and we put it on our carts and we brought it up to them. And the two of their kind of lead officers pulled myself and one of the other organizers aside, separately, and said, hey, we want to talk to you about what's going down. I was like, great, happy to have a conversation. I noticed very, very quickly with the officer that I was talking to, that he had his arms inside of his bulletproof vest. What I knew was that it was actually a de-escalation technique, that he was keeping his hands up on his chest so they weren't down by his gun or his stun gun or anything else like that, and they weren't out aggressively towards me. And so I let him know that I knew that he was doing just that. And I said, oh, you've got your hands behind your vest because it's a de-escalation technique. And he was stunned. He was like, wait, what? And I was like, how did you? And I was like, well, I have led some workshops before for activists on how to deal with police and how to de-escalate situations. And he was like, I teach workshops to civilians about how to work and how to interact with police. And we all of a sudden had this connection right away, right? And like the like fear or like power dynamic kind of started to shift. And I was like, do you know why we're here today? And he was like, oh yeah, I know what's going on. I know what's going on with the bees and colony collapse. And I know what's going on with our food. And I said, good. And he's like, because I think we're making a pretty good point about we should be shifting some policy. He was like, yeah, you've got a point. And I said, look, we're going to have the most amazing event. It's going to be beautiful. There's going to be women. There's going to be children. There's going to be grandparents. This is going to be a protest like you've never, ever seen. And he was like, all right. And sure enough, that's what showed up, because one of the things that we did was before the event happened, we went through everything, every single step of it. And we thought, all right, if one person came and was here for 15 minutes, what would they walk away with? Like, what would be the image in their mind of what we were doing, how we were doing it, and why we were doing it? And so we organized the entire event around that story. We wrote that story. We thought, okay, if this story goes, viral and goes all over in newspapers all around the United States, like, what do we want that story to be? And we wrote it out. We wrote out what our ideal news story was going to be, and then designed the event all along that. And sure enough, people came. It was this most amazing action. We had a big sound system that was facing up towards the FDA offices, and all of the hundreds of people who showed up, everybody got a chance to get on the microphone and say who they were, where they'd come from, why they came, what their message was to the FDA, and what ingredient they'd brought for the soup. And so we had this giant soup pot that was just amazing. And the soup was actually quite delicious. Like, you would think that, hundreds of people all bringing ingredients, trying to make a soup all at once in an afternoon in front of the FDA on the side of the road. It was great. And so, people from the FDA were like at their windows the entire time, like listening and seeing the spectacle. The riot cops left before we did, We like took over the whole grass in front. We had teach-ins going on. We did seed swaps, and we really lived into the intention of what we were pushing for. We're like, here is a microcosm of what we want, right? So it wasn't just the Michael Taylor takeover, stop doing this terrible stuff. We're gonna blockade, we're gonna do whatever. It was like, no, you got to stop doing what you're doing. What you're doing is harmful, but here's a better way. And we're going to carry ourselves with that and we're going to showcase that. And so, there was a number of different press there, like television channels and reporters and everything. And sure enough, 2 days later, lead op-ed in the Washington Post written by Dana Milbanks, he had actually come to write a hit piece about what we were doing because it was under the Occupy Monsanto. And instead, he wrote the story that we wanted to have out there. And it ended up getting syndicated by over 100 newspapers around the United States. And so it went from, again, like starting with this folktale, figuring out how do we bring this into our bodies and bring this into our communities, and then how do we share that out with the larger world to not just impact those that we may be targeting, like the FDA, with our action, but to reverberate out to people all over the United States that have no, or around the world that aren't connected to the issue at all, but still resonate with that connection.
I actually just feel like I ate a full meal listening to all of that. So
Yeah.
great, so touching, so wholesome. It reminds me this quote that says something along the lines that we've been so focused on topple the mighty approaches to creating change that we forgot what it means to raise up the people. It just reminds me of like Julia Butterfly Hill, who said, I
Mhm.
didn't climb the redwood trees because I was angry at the corporations. I climbed the redwood trees because when I climb it and I connect with the trees, it's the feelings of connection that drive me. It's my love for the natural world. And I love that you deeply influenced, this really big event and that it was so much larger than just that day. It was like, how do we engage in these issues and how do we connect with anyone, no matter where they stand, for something that goes way deeper than just like politics and policies?